Welcome back. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about basic types of entrepreneurship, basic definitions of entrepreneurship, a little bit about the role of expertise in entrepreneurial success, and just a little bit about the entrepreneurial journey itself. So I like to refer to entrepreneurship as more of a journey. This is the words of my advisor also. Some people think, well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur for your whole life. And there's no other way around it. Well, that's not always necessarily true either. Starting a new organization as one form of entrepreneurship that we'll discuss, or even challenging a dominant narrative as we see in other forms of entrepreneurship, has a specific time and place, normally in a person's or organization's biography. Some people may start up a business and it lasts only 3 months, and then the opportunity is no longer there. They close up the business and they go back to doing whatever it was they did before. Some people will start a business and stay in that business their whole life. My uncle is a great example. He opened a restaurant. He was in that restaurant basically till the day he died. Okay. Then, of course, other people just bounce from one industry to the next, one business to the next. There's a lot of serial entrepreneurs. I know a lady who has been, she started out consulting, and then she went to tutoring, and then she opened a restaurant, and then she went into property management, and then she opened another restaurant, and then she opened a laundromat, and then she opened a trucking business, and, just back and forth. So just kind of one opportunity after another. She exploits the opportunity to its absolute maximum potential, and then when she's done with it, she sells the business and moves on. So these are very much part of what we call this entrepreneurial journey. And I would encourage all of you not to think about this journey in terms of kind of a chronological time per se. Instead, think of it in terms of what we call chirological time. Let me explain the difference between the two. Chronological time is watch-based time. Did you spend an hour outside or did you not? And chronological time is always kind of forward-looking. And it's a very objective way of measuring time. Chirological time is kind of a process-based time, a subjective kind of time. It's generally seen as qualitative, and it's kind of like steps in a process, right? So let me give an example. Imagine that wherever you are in the world watching this video, that you're frozen, right? I don't know if any of you ever saw that Judge Dredd movie. He's like, frozen that block of ice, right? And then you get melted out of this block of ice, 100 years later or whatever it is. Well, the world around you, there's been 100 years of chronological time passed, but chirologically for you who was frozen that block of ice, no time has passed, right? So because no processes actually took place. Although I suppose the Judge Dredd example is not a very good one because I think he learned how to make sweaters or something when he was frozen. But I think you get the idea. And chirological time is important. I was reading a research paper the other day, and it said that chronological time is basically a human construction, and that for microorganisms and at the cosmic level, at the universal level, chronological time is largely irrelevant. Everything is chirological time, basically. So just leave you with a little bit of food for thought. But let's apply that to entrepreneurship, right? You can have someone that started with an idea when they were in their teens, right? And they put that idea aside. Maybe they're finishing high school, they want to go to university, they want to get experience, whatever, and they don't pick that idea back up until their 40s. So here's the question. Chronologically, I guess you could say that this was a business that was 20, 30 years in the making, right? But chirologically, really not much has happened. It went from an idea as a teenager, and not even writing a business plan occurred until in their 40s. And this kind of entrepreneurial journey is quite typical, right? You can also say, well, if someone was in business for 3 months and they closed it, but is that really a good way to measure, their success or failure? Or maybe should you consider it more in terms of, well, that person went into business, exploited that opportunity to the absolute maximum, and then they got out. And that could have taken 3 months or 3 years. Who cares? That's not the point. The opportunity was kind of extinguished at that point, and they moved on. So I think this is a good way to understand this dichotomy between chirological and chronological time, especially as it applies to entrepreneurship. Now, I'm going to, maybe undermine some of my fellow educators, but, there is no universal definition of entrepreneurship. There is no universal definition of opportunity. There's no universally understood definition or understanding of the relationship between entrepreneurship and opportunities. We'll talk about in the next couple videos. But most importantly, there's no general theory of entrepreneurship. We don't even agree on what it actually is. Okay? So if you meet somebody who tells you there's just one definition of entrepreneurship and that's it, get as far away from that person as possible. They don't know what they're talking about. I had a colleague at one of my previous jobs, and he would always say that he knew everything about entrepreneurship, and this is the absolute way to be successful in entrepreneurship, and he could guarantee as long as you took his class, you'd be a success. And other definitions of entrepreneurship, they were just wrong. I had a long conversation with this individual. He was an instructor. So what we're going to look at right now is just some different types of entrepreneurs or entrepreneurships, right? Or as Carl Weick would say, activities in entrepreneuring, if you read like an entrepreneurship is more of a process as opposed to an event, okay? Entrepreneurship versus entrepreneuring. So this is not a comprehensive list, and I'll put the definitions and the description too. But this is not a comprehensive list or anything like that. But it's at least enough to give you some sort of a taste of the full diversity that's out there with regards to discussions of entrepreneurship. So one of the definitions that I think is the most common is the ex nihilo understanding of entrepreneurship. And ex nihilo, that's a fancy way of using Latin to make yourself sound more sophisticated. By the way, those of you that ever want to, graduate students think you want to publish, if you really want to make your mark, say something really simple, but put it in either French, German, Latin, or ancient Greek, and that's how you'll make your mark. So ex nihilo is Latin for out of nothing. So this is out of nothing entrepreneurship. That's, you see the idea like maybe an inventor comes up and says like, wow, where in the world did they come up with that? I don't know. It's something that, doesn't seem to have any sort of precedent, although it probably does, but it just totally changes everything else in the market, changes the environment, whatever, okay? Then you've got corporate or organizational entrepreneurship. And this is one of my research areas. A lot of people say, I want to be kind of entrepreneurial minded, but I don't want to start my own business. And that's okay. Corporate and organizational entrepreneurship are a good example for you. When I went to graduate school, there were a lot of people who majored in entrepreneurship and had absolutely no intention of going to start their own new business. However, a lot of companies, including consulting companies, value employees that have an entrepreneurial mindset, even though they're not entrepreneurs, according to the classic definition, right? So corporate and organizational entrepreneurship may be good examples for you. Corporate entrepreneurship basically says that a corporation endorses innovative activities within the firm, like the CEO has a plan or a project for you. Good examples occur. I won't name names, but there are some tech companies that have, for example, 10 or 15% of your work time can be devoted to your own projects. That's a good example of corporate entrepreneurship. You're being entrepreneurial, but within the context of a larger organization. Some firms also, bureaucracies get a little stale and rusty sometimes. So they'll have programs, for example, they form a task force, you from accounting, you from finance, you from marketing. I'm going to take all of you and put you in a room and you come up with a great, new idea for the next big thing. Another example, right? Organizational entrepreneurship is the opposite. That's when employees, typically at lower levels of the organization, will come up with brand new ideas for the benefit of the organization. In other words, maybe they think their boss doesn't know what he or she is doing, so they're chit-chatting next to the water cooler and they come up with some idea and they implement it. And it kind of goes against the rules a little bit, but it's for the good of the organization in theory. But it doesn't always work out that way. So corporate entrepreneurship is top-down, whereas organizational entrepreneurship tends to be bottom-up. One example of organizational entrepreneurship that comes to mind is there was a company, again, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to slander anybody on this channel, but they had a program where if you had a good idea, right, and somebody in the company signed off on that idea and said it was a good idea, you received a $500 bonus. Well, there were these two guys in their cubicles, cubimates, I guess you'd say, and they would just bounce bad ideas back and forth. Okay, and one of the guys' ideas was for chopsticks that had a plunger on the end, and you'd suck up soy sauce in it, and then it would squirt the soy sauce onto the sushi while you were eating it. Again, might be a cool idea, but this was a company that made calculators, software programs, printers, computers, computer hardware, things like that. Had nothing to do with that company's main line of business. And this guy actually bragged about how he bought a brand new Jeep Cherokee by getting his cubimate to sign off on his dumb ideas. So that's kind of how it can be twisted or perverted. A cousin of corporate and organizational entrepreneurship is what we call public service entrepreneurship. And that's basically when career civil servants kind of bend the rules a little bit in order to better serve the public. And let me explain how that's possible. A lot of government regulations, all they do is tell you what the end state should be, and it can be kind of vague, and they don't always tell you how to get to that end state. This is how a finalized form should look, but they don't necessarily delineate processes of how to complete them and things like that. And so that can kind of give civil servants or government employees leeway to do things maybe in a different, better, more efficient way for public benefit. So just some food for thought there. Now there's social entrepreneurship also, and that's kind of a hot topic right now, right? And the whole point of social entrepreneurship is that in some way, businesses or the government have failed to meet a social need. And so you can start up a new business that is designed to meet that social need, okay? One of my favorite examples is Homeboy Industries, which is in East Los Angeles. And that's an arm of the Catholic Church started by a guy named Father Gregory Boyle. And his whole point was that the government of Los Angeles and LA County, as well as businesses, were not very strong when it came to rehabilitating former gang members and former inmates of the LA County correction system, right? And you think about why. It's hard to rehabilitate these people from a government perspective. Obviously, the prisons weren't working too well. And businesses can be kind of reticent to hire a former inmate for a variety of reasons. One, sometimes they don't have much of a resume, so they don't really have work experience. And two, maybe they have a violent past, so people don't really hire former inmates too much. So what Father Boyle did as a social entrepreneur is he started an organization that helped restore dignity to these men and women through work. And in the process of kind of working on their spiritual side, he also gave them very solid work experience, training, and credentials that they could then go out and take to any other organization in LA County. But it showed these are people that had been rehabilitated. And this is a big difference between a lot of charities, because they are really good about giving job training, but what they're not always as good at is providing some sort of job or resume blocks on there. So good example there for you too. A cousin of social entrepreneurship is what we call community-based enterprises. They're very similar to social entrepreneurships, but instead of looking at an individual entrepreneur, you look at a city or a region or a neighborhood as the entrepreneurs themselves. Anna Maria Pareto, and I'll put some references to her work in the description, does a lot of really great work on community-based enterprises. She looks at a lot of towns and cities in Latin America where in some way the government has failed to take care or to fulfill its responsibilities to the people. So entire villages actually behave in an entrepreneurial way, for reasons of self-protection, economic welfare, developing themselves, as protecting their culture, for example. So there's a lot of really good examples that Anna Maria has, and it's not a Latin American exclusive phenomenon. She has examples from Canada and Spain and other places too. But that's kind of a cousin of social enterprises. That's a cousin of social entrepreneurship, is a community-based enterprise. Then there's the tech entrepreneurs, and you've probably heard of tech entrepreneurs, right? That's the Silicon Valley narrative. You got this guy, he's in his garage, he comes up with some software program and he changes the world, or an app developer, or those kinds of things, but it has a very strong tech component. Then you also have serial entrepreneurs, okay? And these are individuals that specialize in creating new forms of breakfast time nourishment for young people. maybe it's like the next Lucky Charms, the next Frosted Flakes. And, they may start several of these. They go from Wheaties to Frosted Flakes to, no. I'm just saying if you're paying attention. Serial entrepreneurs are people that are basically addicted to the hustle. They start a series of unrelated businesses throughout the course of their lifetime. I gave an example of a friend of mine who went from property management to restaurants to truck driving to a laundromat to consulting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, these are typically unrelated businesses. They seize an opportunity and then they just move on to the next one. Maybe they close the previous business, maybe they don't. Then we've got Then we've got lifestyle and prosaic entrepreneurs. And a lifestyle entrepreneur is somebody who probably has a full-time job, but they want to, in some way, monetize their hobby. I knew a guy growing up, his hobby was making birdhouses. He didn't even watch birds that much. He just liked the activity of making a birdhouse. He went to a crafts thing, I guess. And he just kept making these birdhouses and didn't have anywhere to put them. He put them in the garage. And so eventually his wife started screaming at him and said, "You get rid of these birdhouses. I'm tired of looking at them." So he started giving away as Christmas presents and things like that. And people's like, his name was Mark. They said, "Mark, can't you start selling these? Can I buy some? I want to give some to X, Y, and Z." And he said, "I don't know. I was just making them because it made me happy to make them, but maybe." So he kind of started selling them. And he actually was a high school teacher, I think of science or something like that. I can't quite remember. And so what he started doing is once he was tired from education, he started making these birdhouses full time. He actually built what we'd call out here is like a barn dominium or an aircraft hangar in his backyard, and he has 6 employees working for him now. And all they do is make birdhouses and sell them. So what he did is he had a hobby, and then he turned it into some sort of a kind of a side business that in this particular case became his full business. And I have another friend that has a lifestyle business too. She loves animals. So what does she do periodically when her friends go out of town? She has the dogs come over to her place and she dog sits for them. Again, it's not usually full-time employment, but it could be. But it's turning your hobby into a business. Then we've also got prosaic entrepreneurship. Prosaic entrepreneurship basically says you have some sort of skill set within your routines or your jobs, and then you turn that into a business. So, for example, my full-time job is I'm a professor, so I teach and I do research. I do administrative stuff too, but mostly teaching and research. I use my position in academia, the education, the training, and all those things that go with it, and I have side businesses in consulting and tutoring and guest speaking and all those kinds of things. So my routine at a university provides a little bit of leeway for me to do things on the side. Okay, that's a good example of prosaic entrepreneurship. I knew another guy who was he taught criminal justice. And so what he would do is he would use his daytime job as a professor of criminal justice, but he was a private investigator on the side, and he would use the resources provided at his university to facilitate his private investigation business, and every time he'd close out a case, he'd turn around and write a research paper about it. So the routines all kind of overlapped. Lifestyle and prosaic are quite similar, although I tend to think of lifestyle as more of a hobby or something like that, whereas prosaic is probably more routines or job type of thing. You've also got family entrepreneurship, and you've all probably thought of this one before too, right? That's the person that maybe works in a family restaurant, a dry cleaning. I did a consulting project one time for a lady. She had a soap making business, and she worked. Her husband procured the materials and things like that. She made actually mixed the soap, and her kids made the soap into bars and cut the labels and things like that. So that was actually a family activity. A lot of people ask me, does this have to be restricted exclusively to restaurants? And no, it can really be anything that's being operated in as a family. Then you've got narrative entrepreneurship, and this is probably my personal favorite. Narrative entrepreneurship, all that means is that the entrepreneur doesn't necessarily start a business, but rather they tell a story that challenges a dominant narrative. And the process of challenging this dominant narrative, it changes or alters the way people see themselves in the world. A couple great examples, like think of Jesus. Jesus is a great example, and I'm not trying to proselytize or impose religious views. That's not the point of this example. But you think of Jesus. Jesus, as far as I know, didn't start a business, but he changed the way people saw themselves and understood themselves in the world, and he challenged a dominant narrative that has lasted, by the way. Or you can think of someone like Martin Luther King. Again, not a businessman in the traditional sense, but he challenged the way people saw themselves in the world. That's also a narrative entrepreneur. Or you could look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. And I would put him in the narrative category, not because he started Facebook, but rather because of the fact that the way that Facebook has changed the way that people communicate with each other. And I'll give an example. When I was an undergrad, I was over 21, you went to a bar and you talked to people. You looked at the person on the left and you chatted with them. I'm not even talking about pickups. You sat and you told jokes about something on TV, or you talked about politics, or you watched the game together, something, right? Now you go to a bar and you look to the left and everyone's on the phone. And it started really with Facebook. That changed or challenged that dominant narrative. Now, my final thought for this particular video is the role of expertise in entrepreneurship. A lot of people think that you must be an expert in a certain field or industry to be a success, and some people think that being an expert in a given field guarantees success. Both of those preconceptions are not supported empirically. I don't want to use the word wrong, but they're not supported empirically. Let me give a couple of quick examples to illustrate my point. Periodically I'll do, work with an aspiring entrepreneur, and they say, I'm a vice president of whatever at this firm, and I know way more than my boss, and I'm going to get out because I know everything, and I'm going to start my new business. Okay? But here's the problem, right? Is the timing or the opportunity right for you? And by the way, who's heard of you anyhow? You weren't the president, you were the vice president. Nobody knows who you are. So you're going to have a few issues with legitimacy. So even being the smartest person in the world may not be enough. And furthermore, a new market that you're entering may not even be ready for what you're doing. It has nothing to do with you being smart or dumb or anything like that. But opportunities are usually restricted to certain kinds of time and place. And of course, they're changing and they're morphing all the time. So it's very hard to generalize that one form of expertise that worked on one occasion is necessarily going to translate into a form of expertise in a different occasion. So keep that in mind. And by the way, a lot of serial entrepreneurs may not know anything about the industry that they're entering, but they can go ahead, they can do their research, and what they know is how to start a business, how to hustle, how to do these kinds of things. And that's the skill that they use to start the business, and then they hire the experts in the field to work for them. So again, expertise is not a prerequisite of entrepreneurial success, and it's not a guaranteed factor in determining that success either. So, great. Well, I hope you enjoyed this particular video. Our next video will be just a little bit shorter, don't worry. We're going to talk about the relationship and definitions of entrepreneurship and opportunity. I'll see you then.